Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. The relationship between India and Pakistan continues to face significant challenges shaped by historical complexities, security concerns, and efforts at diplomacy that often face setbacks. In today's Point of View segment, we explore this issue through a security and counter-terrorism lens. With us is MUNIRA Mustaffa, a specialist in security and counter-terrorism, to help us better understand the current situation, its regional impact, and the role that international diplomacy can play in supporting long-term peace and stability. MUNIRA, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for doing this. Let's begin by setting the stage. Now, the situation between India and Pakistan often draws global attention, especially when tensions flare up as it's happening now. From your perspective and from your vantage point, can you help us understand the current state of this relationship, particularly through the lens of security and counterterrorism? MUNIRA?
We're seeing an extremely volatile situation right now. Just yesterday, India carried out what they're calling Operation Sindoor, missile strikes against what they describe as terrorist infrastructure in Pakistan. This was in direct response to that horrific attack in Pahalgam recently, where 26 tourists were killed. So from a counterterrorism perspective, what's particularly concerning is how terrorist attacks continue to function as catalysts for escalation between these nuclear powers. India claims they were targeting infrastructure linked to groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, which they blame for the Pahalgam attack. Pakistan denies any involvement and says the strikes hit civilian areas, including mosques. It's worth noting that in January 2023, India designated the Resistance Front, or TRF, as a terrorist organization. TRF initially claimed responsibility for the Pahalgam attack on Telegram, but later they revoked that claim. Intelligence agencies consider TRF a proxy of Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is already designated as a terrorist organization by the UN Security Council. TRF reportedly stated that violence will be directed toward those attempting to settle illegally, which does not explain why tourists were targeted and does not align with the typical pattern of terrorist attacks in Kashmir. So the context here is important. After Prime Minister Modi revoked Kashmir's special status in 2019, the region was placed under direct control from Delhi. Several reforms have encouraged non-Kashmiris to settle in the region, with over 85,000 resident permits issued to non-locals. And this has fueled growing sentiments among Kashmiri Muslims. TRF and several other splinter groups like Kashmir Tigers emerged in the wake of these 2019 changes. So this is a part of troubling pattern. This is actually the third major instance since 2016 where India has conducted cross-border strikes following attacks they attribute to Pakistan-based groups. And each time, the response gets more intense. So one of the biggest challenges here is the lack of agreement on who's a terrorist and who's a freedom fighter. Without that basic consensus, meaningful counterterrorism cooperation becomes almost impossible. So the other major concern is how previous de-escalation mechanisms have weakened. Despite establishing a ceasefire along the line of control in 2021, we've seen that agreement gradually fall apart. Just in the past few days, cross-border shelling have claimed dozens of civilian lives. And hanging over of all this is the nuclear factor. Security experts call it a stability-instability paradox. While nuclear weapons make all-out war unthinkable, they may actually encourage lower-level conflicts and proxy warfare, including terrorist activities. So moving forward, the critical challenge here are preventing future attacks, establishing reliable attribution mechanisms, and creating diplomatic off-ramps that allow both sides to save face. Without addressing these issues, I'm afraid we're going to keep seeing this cycle of terrorist attacks followed by military responses that risk uncontrolled escalation.
Right, so you're talking about basic consensus here, but let's go back a little bit. So if you look at the history between India and Pakistan, what are the factors that cause the rising tensions from time to time? We see this happening despite efforts at diplomacy between the two, and also countries surrounding it and countries who have an interest in both these countries.
When we examine this conflict, there's a perfect storm of factors that keep undermining the diplomatic efforts. At the core is Kashmir, this unresolved territorial dispute from the 1947 partition. But it's much deeper than geography. For Pakistan, Kashmir represents unfinished business of partition. Its Muslim majority population validates the founding idea of a homeland for South Asian Muslims. For India, keeping Kashmir affirms their identity as a secular state where different religions can coexist. So domestic politics plays a crucial role. On both sides, Kashmir has become a nationalist rallying point. Taking a hardline position wins votes, making compromise politically risky. So we see this with Prime Minister Modi asserting greater Indian control and with Pakistan's military positioning itself as Kashmir's defender. So these domestic pressures severely constrain diplomatic options. The security dynamics are particularly significant. Pakistan is aware it cannot match India conventionally, and it has historically relied on asymmetric warfare through non-state actors. Groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba essentially serve as force multipliers. From a counterterrorism perspective, what complicates matter is Pakistan's alleged strategic death policy, supporting certain militant groups while fighting others. Meanwhile, India's increasingly militarized approach in Kashmir creates grievances that militant recruiters can exploit. Terrorism repeatedly disrupts diplomatic momentum. The 2001 Indian parliament attack halted a promising peace process. The 2008 Mumbai attacks derailed normalization efforts. The 2016 Uri attack ended dialogue possibilities. Each attack essentially resets diplomatic progress to zero. External players shape the landscape too. And during the Cold War, superpower rivalries influenced the conflict. Today, it's China's partnership with Pakistan and India strengthening ties with the United States, creating new complications. And even the structure of diplomacy poses challenges. Pakistan's security policy is dominated by the military, while India has democratic processes, which create mismatched decision-making systems. Back-channel diplomacy has shown promise occasionally, but tends to collapse during crisis. So this explains why breakthroughs like the 2003 ceasefire or the 2013 visa liberalization cannot withstand security incidences, domestic politics, and conflicting strategic interests.
Now, when we look at the situation, how does the ongoing conflict between Pakistan and India affect other countries in the region, particularly Malaysia, as Malaysia sits on the chair of ASEAN at this point?
Well, the impact of these conflicts may extend well beyond South Asia. For countries like Malaysia, the effects come through multiple channels. From a security perspective, any escalation between nuclear powers naturally concerns everyone in Asia, including us. What we just saw with Operation Sindoor demonstrates how quickly localized tensions can escalate. For Malaysia, this adds another layer of complexity to a security landscape already challenged by South China Sea disputes and transnational threats. Economically, there are tangible impacts. When tensions flare up, they disrupt regional trade flows. Malaysia, with its trade-dependent economy and growing commercial ties to both India and Pakistan, we can feel these disruptions. The temporary closure of airspace during recent hostilities affected flight routes that connect Southeast Asia to Europe. Malaysian airlines and businesses we directly experience that. Conflicts can also drive up energy prices, affecting our economy. Diplomatically, Malaysia maintains a delicate balance. As a prominent Muslim-majority nation with good relationship with both countries, Malaysia must weigh multiple considerations. India is a major trading partner and source of tourists and students. At the same time, Malaysia shares religious and cultural bonds with Pakistan. Each escalation requires careful diplomatic navigation. So the whole thing, the counterterrorism angle is significant. Malaysia has its own security concerns about extremism and has worked with both India and Pakistan on counterterrorism initiatives. But when these two countries disagree fundamentally about what constitutes terrorism, it complicates those multilateral efforts. The domestic dimension matters too. Malaysia has a significant Indian diaspora community and a Muslim population whose views on Kashmir occasionally influence political discourse. Managing those domestic sensitivities while maintaining balanced foreign relations requires careful consideration. And finally, Malaysia's position in ASEAN provides potential diplomatic opportunities. While ASEAN typically focuses on Southeast Asian issues, its experience in preventive diplomacy might offer valuable perspectives, particularly through forums like the ASEAN Regional Forum, where both India and Pakistan participate. So while Malaysia isn't directly involved in the conflict, we still experience these ripple effects that require thoughtful responses across diplomatic, economic, and security domains.
Right. Before I let you go, very quickly, well, when we look at this whole thing, and we've got about a minute left, how does the presence of nuclear weapons shape the strategic calculations of both countries in this standoff? Maybe how prepared is the international diplomatic framework to respond if nuclear rhetoric turns into actual deployment of use? And this is very grim areas to look at. Very quickly, if you can walk us through that.
Nuclear weapons fundamentally transforms the strategic landscape between India and Pakistan. They create what security experts call mutual vulnerability. Both nations can inflict unacceptable damage on each other, regardless of who strikes first. This produces what can be termed as the stability-instability paradox. While nuclear deterrence makes large-scale war prohibitively costly, it paradoxically enables lower-intensity conflicts. Pakistan, perceiving conventional military disadvantage, views nuclear weapons as an equalizer that provides space for supporting non-state actors without risking existential defeat. India seeks limited conventional options below Pakistan's nuclear threshold, as seen in Operation Sindoor. The nuclear factor complicates crisis management. It elevates international interest in conflict resolution, with the global community applying pressure for restraint. Pakistan has occasionally leveraged this through what we call nuclear blackmail, highlighting escalation risks to generate diplomatic intervention. The geography of South Asia creates extremely short warning times, potentially just minutes between launch and impact, increasing risks of miscalculation. From my perspective, this can complicate India's responses to terrorist attack, which must be forceful enough to deter yet calibrated to avoid nuclear red lines. And unlike the US-Soviet relationship, India and Pakistan lack robust confidence-building measures like dedicated crisis communications channels or verifiable arms control agreements. Moving forward, managing this nuclear rivalry requires better communication channels, clearer understanding of red lines, and addressing the underlying drivers of conflict.
With that, we'd like to thank you, MUNIRA Mustaffa, specialist in security and counterterrorism, taking time off to join us right here in BERNAMA. Well, thank you very much, MUNIRA. We'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.